So Daniel, welcome to the Recovery Lab. I appreciate you joining me this evening. I appreciate your patience with me this evening. I can't believe sometimes, man, I get so absent-minded. You know, you get so many things going on and just things slip out of your mind. I'd like to say it was the first time it's happened, but probably not.
May not be the last either.
Yeah, probably not.
We got a lot going on, man.
Yes, absolutely. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you've got going on? Tell us, you can start anywhere you want. If you want to talk about some of your past, feel free to. You don't have to talk a whole lot about that. I'd also like to talk about, your work as a peer recovery specialist and with Take Action Today and really in the recovery community in general. Because, you've been active in the recovery community for several years. So I would really like to spend the next hour hearing your perspective on things, both as a person entering recovery, as a person learning about recovery, to a person helping other people, initiate and maintain recovery.
Well, that's, I'll do my best to get all that in an hour. We like to talk. But anyways, my journey began when I decided to start using in junior high, and headed down the wrong path. I was drinking and using drugs by high school. Just had a long road of use and hurting people really because of my use.
Yeah.
And it was May 2nd, 2019. I just decided that there was time to make a change. And I'd said it many times before, but there was just something different that time.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the day that my recovery journey started. It didn't take me long to figure out that I wanted to help people in recovery.
Yeah.
Specifically people that suffered with issues that I suffered with. I went in thinking that I was just an alcoholic, and really there was a whole lot of underlying issues that just led to that alcoholism. So over the last several years, I've discovered the need for holistic recovery instead of just seeking sobriety. So that, for me means not only to remain abstinent from alcohol and drugs, but to seek out that spiritual recovery, the physical recovery. When we quit using, our body goes through a lot of changes. Our mind goes through a lot of changes.
We definitely get better.
Yeah, that's no joke. Mine actually fluctuates.
Yeah.
But and then my journey with recovery started with a couple AA meetings. I thought that, that was what I knew at the time. That's all I ever heard of was, AA. So I tried a couple of those, and it just wasn't for me. I didn't feel that I fit with that. So I started doing some research and discovered a Celebrate Recovery 12-step program. And that is what worked for me. I was able to build a community around myself, which I now know is very important.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I tell these guys I work with the importance of it now, and it just breaks my heart to see them fail because they didn't listen and didn't get that support.
Yeah.
Because I know how important it is, and we like to think that we're man enough to do it on our own, but it's not possible. And I guess if it is, it's you're one in a million. I'm sure there are people out there that can tell you, yes, I did it on my own. I think the success stories probably are few and far between if you're doing it on your own. So I built that support system, and in my first year, I did have 3 single-use slips, but then again, I had that support system. I had those guys around me that held me up and said, let's not give up. Let's get back on track. They didn't shame me. There was
That's awesome.
no finger pointing per se, and that meant a lot. I worked the 12-step program, went through a 12-step study, did that for about 2 years, made several attempts to get into CR leadership that just didn't work out. And I've always been a firm believer in everything happens for a reason. So I just rolled with it.
Sure.
Later on in the journey, I attempted to go to school. I thought, well, I want to help people. Let's sign up for some classes. I thought it'd be a great idea to do it in the middle of COVID. With my technological barriers as well, I signed up for 100% online schooling, and really, looking back, know that I was just setting myself up for failure. Like I said, I'm technologically stupid. It was the middle of COVID. So that was a thing where I ended up just dropping the classes. So I wasn't going to be charged money. And again, just chalked it up as maybe this isn't the time. This isn't what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
So I just kept working. And then you actually pointed out a recovery coach program that was online through Governor State University. And that was my first dive into beginning the journey towards helping others in recovery. Was that 40-hour online course. It taught me quite a bit.
Yeah.
Again, that was an online thing, so I was kind of hesitant at first. I was like, man, I failed this once. Like, can I really do this? And
kudos to you for trying again.
It worked out. I completed it. I got that 40-hour certificate. And again, I continued to work. At that time, I was sitting on the board of directors for Take Action Today. So I felt like I was contributing some, but I just wanted to do more. And I just continued to work. And then this whole SIU School of Medicine program came around.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I'll try this. I'll send in the application. We'll go through the interview. And I was actually accepted into that CPRS program through SIU School of Medicine, with a fabulous instructor. But no, that's been good too.
I have heard he's quite the instructor.
But around that same time, I was able to transition into a full-time position with Take Action Today as a peer recovery specialist and start going to school to eventually get that certification. And now I just work every day trying to help people get to where I'm at in life, which I've discovered is not so easy.
No, it's not.
There's a fine line there between like wanting to grab somebody and shake them and tell them what they need to do and gently persuading them in the direction to do it. I would rather just grab them and shake them, but that's just not acceptable.
It can be tough sometimes, man. It can be frustrating. We are frustrating people.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed.
I've talked to a lot of people that attempt to try to go back to school. It's like sometimes we get pigeonholed into these ideas of things that we need to do to be successful. I was recently able to go back to school and complete my undergraduate's degree all completely online. But that wasn't the first time I tried to go to college. I'd made probably 2 or 3 other attempts throughout my recovery. And it seemed like you say, things just never worked out. Be it my own mental health challenges and dealing with my own personal stuff, my brain was never able to just put things together. I tried tech school one time, and I was going to actually, for some reason, I thought I was going to become an auto mechanic. I was like taking an auto mechanic. Dude, I had absolutely no mechanical aptitude whatsoever.
Oh, man, I could see you being like a NASCAR pit guy.
Yeah, I bet, man. The guy over there listening to reggae in the corner cracking jokes. But it never worked out. And when I remember actually referring to myself often as a dumb coal miner. I felt like kind of like some of the same sentiment that you share. The term that I used was technologically degenerate. I felt like I was getting worse as time went by, because I remember a time in dial-up where I could actually get on and do things, and now I can't even play PlayStation anymore or Xbox because the games are so complicated. I can't do shooters because I can't run in one direction and shoot in the other one. But I ended up, for some reason, things worked out this time. I felt like that was really the first time in my life when I realized that I felt like I had healed from the trauma, from the drug use, from the damage it had done, to where I was no longer coming at life from a deficit position. I was actually starting to operate in the positive side of things, starting to move forward with life. And things worked out this time. That's 20 something years into recovery. I think I was about 18 or 19 years in recovery at that time. But I tried a lot of things previous to that I failed just miserably. In fact, before I tried starting Take Action Today, when I got out of coal mines, I tried some other jobs and was just terrible at them. And man, I felt so defeated. And man, I mean, I really battled with some depression issues because I was struggling to reestablish my identity outside of being a coal miner. And then I kept trying professions that I felt like I should have been successful at. Everybody was telling me, you're going to be great at that. And 3 months later, I'm sitting there and I'm not being great at it,
Feel defeated.
Yeah. And after a couple of years, I felt like that until I started going to school. And a lot of it came through spiritual revelation, through spiritual growth, and over a period of time, getting somebody in my life that was a spiritual mentor that really kind of helped me grow. I feel like that's the spiritual side of things that's left out so often, even in recovery that embraces spirituality. They embrace it in an ambiguous way, where I feel like with our similar experiences in Christianity, we have like personal relationships with a higher power, Jesus or God, and it's a personal thing for us. And I feel like it's a different thing. And that's one of the things I love about CR and their STEP program. Share with us a little bit, if you don't mind, about the CR program, about how the steps work. We've never really delved into any of that stuff on this show before. So please share with us about how that stuff works.
Yeah, the Celebrate Recovery 12-step program does mirror the 12 steps that AA uses. Mm-hmm. CR just chooses to recognize the higher power as Jesus Christ. Yeah. And there is the 8 principles that go along with the 12 steps that all reflect the Beatitudes out of the Bible. Everything that CR teaches is biblically backed. Yeah. And there is a slight difference as far as their program goes. You do have a large group and like a lesson or testimony time in CR, whereas typically an AA setting is more of just a small group setting. Yeah. And then CR follows that time with a small group as well. CR is big on accountability partners. Mm-hmm. It's almost as if multiple accountability partners and a sponsor are kind of equal in their eyes. Sure. Per se, like my 12-step study I went through, the 4 guys that did it in that group chose that we would all just be accountability partners for each other instead of having one individual sponsor. That's and that was acceptable. So we all openly shared our inventory and things together as a group and then discussed it. So I just it was a little bit different for me than what I had seen at the 2 12-step AA meetings that I'd been to. So it just felt more comfortable to me. So that's awesome. What I went with.
I love that. I love the connection you can establish in a group like that, where you're intimate with a group of other guys, I'm assuming.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And you can open up and tell, like, there's things I shared with those men that I'll never share with anybody else. Yeah. Because you build that bond.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the things that I love about CR, too, is how you can get outside of it's not just substance use. Right. It's always, what is it? Hurts, habits, or
hang-ups. Yeah. And I think the statistics said that, like, it was one in 3, I do believe, attend CR for substance use. Yeah. So 2 out of every 3 are there for another reason. Yeah. Don't quote me on that, but I do think that's something right around there.
Sure, probably. It sounds about right. I know in the CR groups that I've been to and visited, I couldn't really tell you because the substance use was never really like a central focus of anything. I don't remember anything discussed. I know during testimonies people would talk about that stuff, and people would share. But typically, like especially in small group, man, you know, it was a
Yeah, it was
lot
just
of,
called open share.
yeah,
It wasn't designed just for substance use.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was awesome. I think that's a great idea having, you know, a small accountability group like that.
Yeah, it worked well for me. We've recently, a couple of us with Take Action Today have started the training for the Smart Recovery, which I
Okay,
also find
yeah.
very interesting. It's a totally different approach than
Mm-hmm.
CR or AA,
Yeah.
and I'm really excited to bring it to Southern Illinois. We're about halfway through the training, so you know we've learned a lot.
Yeah.
I'm excited to go visit the other local group that they have to see how they run it and things like that. But I really think it'll be a good fit for us here in Southern Illinois.
Awesome.
It's more of an inclusive recovery program
Yeah.
that welcomes everyone. We've always said that we like to meet people where they are, and I think that is what the Smart Recovery is geared towards.
Yeah.
They welcome people even if they're still using.
Yeah.
So long as you can maintain yourself in the meeting, anyone's welcome in any condition.
Yeah.
And I think that's huge that, you know, you can welcome somebody that might not be ready to quit yet, but they can come and meet with people that have already made that decision.
Absolutely.
And see the possibilities and get a little hope.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Seeing the possibility, because when you're surrounded by it, you can't imagine what recovery looks like. You can't imagine what a different life looks like. But when you start seeing it, when you get around it, when you're in proximity to other people and you receive that messaging,
Yeah.
you can't help but be impacted by it.
Yeah, that just being in a room full of positive energy can
Yes.
change your outlook on life.
Absolutely, it can.
And I think that it's just something that's needed in this area.
Yeah.
I feel like there's people that might feel excluded from a completely abstinence-based 12-step group.
Sure.
And that even goes as far as to say people that use medicated assisted treatment.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of old school AA people will tell you you're not sober if you're on medication.
Yeah.
And so those people may, you know, they may not feel welcomed in those settings and may never go back and may never get that connection that they need.
Yeah.
Because they just don't feel accepted because of their pathway to recovery.
Absolutely.
And some people are going to need that medication for the rest of their life even. It's quite possible.
They might.
Like,
the way some people are approaching it. And you never know, because for one thing, that everybody that gets into this, you know, different substances and chemicals impact everybody differently. But there are those individuals that, especially with the opioids and methamphetamine, that they will reroute and do damage to neural networks that, you know, might not, you know, be able to function in a certain way again. And one of the things that I love about Smart Recovery is that it utilizes evidence-based practices to really address some issues in a simple format. Some of the stuff that they teach in that is pretty heady stuff with cognitive behavioral therapy. And if a clinician was doing it, it would be in a much larger context. But they put it in a very simple, easy to understand, so that really anybody can learn how to do it, start a group. And like you say, it's so inclusive that people who regardless of what type of challenges they face, mixed with mental health challenges and stuff like that, that they can find success in there. You know, and those people like you talk about that might need medicated assisted treatment the rest of their life because damage has been done, or because their body chemistry has changed to where they become like really dependent upon it. Right. You know, those people are out there and they need to find places where, because if they can thrive on this medicine, who are we to say that, hey, you can't have that? Right. Because you're not doing it the way we do it. So you have to continue to suffer. You know, I think that's one of the great things I love about where we're at in the recovery community now, is to where we're meeting people where they're at, rather than expecting people to come up to where we're at.
Right. And the smart recovery, another approach that I really like that they use is the rational emotive behavioral therapy, the REBT.
Okay, yeah.
It teaches us to identify on our own our irrational thoughts and emotions, and then turns and teaches us how to change our thought patterns so that we can recognize those irrational thoughts and get them out. Like just flip it around. And that the smart recovery it encourages people to be self-aware and to take responsibility for their own recovery, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. You said a key word right there, being self-aware, knowing what's going on inside your body and inside your own mind. Because so much of what keeps us in our negative behaviors is irrational thought patterns.
Absolutely.
And when we can reframe those thought patterns and restructure them, especially in a positive manner to where it's more positively focused, more strength based, you can change somebody's life. And what we know from neuroscience, which is cool, is that you can actually change the structure of your brain and the way your brain works by changing your thought patterns. And it's so neat the way God built us to be like this.
Yeah. And that's we get caught up in those irrational thought patterns during use. And then I think we get to the point where I know I did during my use. I'm not even sure that there was irrational thoughts.
Yeah.
Because as soon as one even began to come into my brain, I just numbed it. So really, there wasn't a whole as far as emotions and thoughts around that. There was none. There was. So I think that if I would have had someone to show me those irrational thoughts and teach me how to change that thought pattern, my journey in recovery may have been more successful a little sooner. Looking back, I think that the smart recovery structure would have probably fit me better back then, but I didn't know about it.
Yeah.
It wasn't around here. It still isn't. The closest one's Paducah, Kentucky. So it's just not something that's big in this area. Yeah. And I'm just excited to see what we can do. And hopefully in the future, we'll be able to not just host one meeting a week, but maybe utilize our different resource centers and have multiple even in different towns.
Absolutely. I'm excited. I know since I've been involved in this work over the last few years, I've heard conversations about it and people talk about getting the training and stuff, but nothing's ever come to fruition. So I'm excited. Like you say, I think that's one of the things that I enjoy most about what we get to do at Take Action Today is bring new types of thinking, new ways of thinking, new resources, just like that, to an area that has only typically had one or two pathways of recovery. Now we can talk about things and make people see that other things are effective too. I think of my pathway of recovery really as like faith-based harm reduction, because it was a working out process. I didn't just, I had periods of abstinence in my life, but I also had periods where I'd go back and try to social drink and experiment, and they usually ended up in disaster. But they weren't relapses. Yeah. You could call them a slip and they could be looked like that, but it was me attempting to be normal. Right. And it just never worked out for me. But eventually that stuff faded away because I was slowly healing my mind and slowly, reforming my thought patterns and shaping the way I viewed the world in a different way.
It's funny you say that, and the feeling normal, because that first year in my journey, that's exactly what I dealt with every time that I drank in that first year. All 3 times was I just want to fit in again. I want to be normal. I made it 7 months with abstinence the first time from alcohol and went out for my birthday and my sister's birthday. And for some reason, it's like, I can go to a winery and have a beer.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
3 beers later, we're going to the Pin Oak and Carterville for whiskey shots and to shut it down.
Yep.
You know,
one is too many, and 1,000 is never enough.
And for some reason, I did it 2 more times. You know, just thinking that maybe this time I'll be able to do it. Absolutely not. So that's just it's just funny that you say that, because that's exactly like sometimes in our recovery we get to a point where we're like, can't I just be normal like everybody else? And it's a shame that the norm is to be able to socially drink. Yeah. Like in America,
isn't that right?
I see it all the time. Alcohol is the only drug you have to explain not using.
Yep. It is.
And it's crazy that there is that. It's almost like the negative stigma. There's a stigma around alcohol that says you're supposed to do it, you know, and that it's normal to do it and to do it excessively even.
Yes. And it's like you say, and that's even normal.
Yeah. So it I don't know. It's a struggle. But it's not, I say it's a struggle. The alcohol's not a struggle.
Yeah.
I have no desire to do that. It's the struggle is, seeing America in that mindset that we need to do it and it's okay to do it, and that you're only normal if you go out on the weekends to the bar because it's Southern Illinois and what else do you do?
Yeah.
So it took a lot of adjustment and getting used to, again, changing that mindset for myself even, and now trying to instill that mindset change in others, you know, to show them and explain to them that it's not normal to drink in excess all the time. Yeah. And it should not be normalized to be okay.
Yeah, that's what I try. It doesn't have to be that way, you know, especially when you recognize so many dangers about things. But we're weird as people like that, right? You know, and I don't just mean people I don't just mean people with addiction or mental health challenges. I mean, just as people man. General, it's like, you know, we know that our diet's crap, but we'll continue to go eat. You know, if I find a bag of Dubs in my pantry when I get home, I'm gonna probably eat 20 little pieces of chocolate before I go to bed. You know.
Yeah, I get it, and that's it's just the way our brains are wired. Yeah. And it's a constant, not necessarily battle, but you know, we have to constantly work on those thoughts and actions. I can easily sit down on the couch and eat a whole bag of mini chocolate donuts and a big glass of milk, but I have to remind myself that this is not okay. Yeah. And sometimes I can, you know, remind myself and have the will to put that bag of donuts back in the cabinet. And other times, I just sit on the couch and eat a bag of donuts. And, you know, at the end of the day, I remind myself it's a little bit better than what I used to do.
Yeah, man. I think about I mean, sometimes you got to have, I don't even know if it's so far as vices, but I mean, you can't just live this rigid. I know some people do live these rigid lifestyles, and more power to them. I know that they're super successful, and I've got some friends of mine that are like super into fitness and all the diet. I mean, like, and it's not just that, but they carry that into other aspects of their life, like business and financial stuff. So they're really, you know, success driven, motivation driven, and it's all great, but that's totally not me. And if I try to force myself into that, I am only going to end up miserable. Yep. Because I'm not going to be I'm not going to do well at it. And then I'm going to be, you know, that's where that binge purge type thing comes in, where you try to live this lifestyle and then you give up on it. Now you feel defeated. So you just indulge, you know, and it's that roller coaster ride that's really bad on your body and on your mental health too when you do it. I know I really try to guard my mental health as much as my physical. I probably put too much emphasis on my mental health because it's easier, basically. I can spend a lot of time meditating.
Right. Yeah, the mental health aspect of it was big for me. Yeah. I used to say that I was depressed because I drank, and I drank because I was depressed. Yeah. And that was very true. And I thought that when I quit drinking daily, to the point of blackout, that my depression would immediately just disappear. Yeah. But through a little bit of research and learning, you know, I realized that it could take a year for the chemicals in my brain to level back out, for me to have that normal level-headed thought process. So it was that first year, it was very rough for me. I had to end a relationship because it just was not healthy
Yeah.
for my recovery. And that was one of the hardest things I ever had to do. Because I'm not going to say that it was an unhealthy relationship per se or toxic, or
Yeah.
it was before I got sober for sure. But after sobriety, I changed as a person.
Yeah.
And through those changes, it created some issues, some conflict. There was some tension, that wasn't there before. Because before I didn't care. I numbed everything and I drank. So
Yeah.
you do what you do, and we'll scream and yell at each other, and it's okay.
Start to feel feelings.
Yeah, and that was exactly it, man. Like I had numbed all of my emotions for so long that when those emotions came back, it was like a tidal wave. And it took me probably 6 or 8 months.
Yeah.
Even after that year, so a year and a half into it to actually start to feel what I think is normal, but what's normal, like, but I say normal as in like not having those self-destructive thoughts, those urges, those, not constantly fighting the thought of drinking every time somebody ticked me off.
Yeah.
Because I was the type, that's what I did. Like I drank because I celebrated, because I was happy. I drank because I was angry.
Yeah.
Drank because I was mad. I could always find an excuse.
Right.
So it was like I was just waiting for somebody like, okay, make me mad so I can,
So do you think it was more that though? Do you think it was more of you were fishing for an excuse to drink, or
Absolutely.
was it you're coping with the emotion? Because I hear a lot of people say that they're coping with that emotion, but I feel like for me it was more of, hey, now I got an excuse to go get drunk.
I'd say mine was about 50-50.
Yeah.
Like there were times where I would pick fights.
Yeah.
So that I would have
you
an
talked about
excuse to get
fighting a
drunk.
lot. You thought about fighting a lot.
Yeah. No, I would pick fights. And I'm not, when I say fights, I speak of arguments.
Okay.
Not, I was not a physical guy when I got intoxicated, but boy, my mouth was just wild. It's unfiltered sober. So you get me drunk and I could just cut somebody to pieces. But yeah, that was the biggest thing to learn how to control for me.
Yeah.
And still to this day, I'm tested.
Yeah.
Now I work with people that are hurting, and sometimes they say some pretty harsh things.
Bro,
and in my position, I just have to smile and say, I'm sorry you feel that way.
Yeah.
Whereas before, I would have loved to just blown up, or use it as an excuse to drink.
Yeah.
Like, and it's all about, like I said, those, it's the thought patterns.
Right.
It's what it all stems back to, is those thought patterns and how we handle those and how we handle our raw emotions.
Yeah.
I think that the emotions is the biggest thing that people have to deal with when we stop using.
Yeah.
Because that's typically what we're trying to numb.
A lot of times, yeah.
We don't want to feel it. We don't want to deal with it. So we numb it. And then when we quit numbing it, it's a challenge.
Yeah. For me, it was like you talk about, it wasn't so much the emotions as it was the voices in my head, like not like I was hearing voices, but
Right.
the competing thought patterns, just all over the place, racing thought patterns, especially at night, stuff like that. I felt like I was really emotionally, not because of the drinking, but because of my trauma. I think I felt emotionally numb through most of my drug use. There wasn't a lot of emotional ups and downs, although I displayed that type of characteristic. I don't remember feeling a lot of emotions through that, or really much as I got into recovery. But like I said, it was the thought patterns that drove me mad. Just constantly, just negative thought patterns, dealing with a lot of paranoia. It was just wild. And that's what I felt like I was drowning out more than anything. It's just those voices.
I get that.
But I was similar to you. I started when I was young, not so much with drugs and alcohol at first, but just with getting in trouble. I probably started I remember getting paddled the first time in school when I was in like first grade. but then just patterns of behavior issues after that. I don't know. I guess because of the age, when I grew up, I probably didn't. Why I didn't get diagnosed with ADHD or some type of conduct disorder or something like that. But
Just wasn't real prevalent then.
Yeah.
Like that's.
But by the time I was 14, dude, I was getting a lot of fights at school all the time, and then by 15, I was full blown juvenile delinquent, getting locked up all the time and stuff. But then the drug use came later. But that trauma started building up at a very early age. And then when I did drink, it was like absolute binge blackout drinking. The only times I recall even blacking out, if you can say it that way, is when I was young at that age. Even as much as I drank as an adult, I never blacked out.
I can't say the same.
Yeah.
But I can't, like, I had mastered the art of blacking out by 8th grade.
Yeah.
I tell people.
No kidding.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The summer, I was 13, the summer between 8th grade and freshman year was the biggest party of my life.
Mm-hmm.
I stayed with a guy all summer whose dad didn't care what we did.
Yeah.
My mom would bring me a Walmart sack full of clean clothes once a week and take my dirty ones home.
Oh, wow.
And we were free to do what we wanted that summer. And I say that it was probably my 8th grade graduation money that fueled that summer of fun. And that led to a whole lot of just binge drinking.
Mm-hmm.
My sophomore year of high school was the last year of school that I'd ever finish. I dropped out twice, got my first DUI at 16.
Really? Wow, I did not know that.
45 days after I got my license, got my first DUI. Then dropped out of high school twice and ended up getting a GED.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I was just worried about partying. The summer between freshman and sophomore year, my mother moved us in with a guy that was a raging alcoholic that always had a fridge full of beer and a gallon of wine on top. So I had access to whatever I wanted.
Right.
They didn't care. He bought us a swimming pool so we could invite friends over and party in the backyard. Like, it was just acceptable in the home for me to drink at 16, 17 years old.
Yeah, it goes back to that typical American attitude towards alcohol.
Yeah. And Mom would always say that I'd rather you do it here than be out doing it on the street somewhere else.
I've heard a lot of that.
And I get that to an extent, but as a 16, 17-year-old boy, I heard go ahead and do it, you know? And so I did. And it just continued. And
that'd be like the original safe use site.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was as far as I hosted the end of the season football party my sophomore year of high school.
Yeah.
Everybody got wasted in the backyard. We camped out. Everybody stayed in a tent, but still, like, it. And yes, it does go back to that mentality of, well, their kids will be kids. They're going to do it. They might as well do it here. And I don't think that's the best approach.
Yeah.
I
don't think so either.
I know where it got me, but yeah, there was just little supervision. I was just let to run wild.
Yeah, I feel like that was one of the big issues in my younger years too. We come from a very poor family, and then Mom and Dad worked their way through college, working full-time jobs. And, we were the generation of latchkey kids. So we were always at home by ourselves. And then once I got old enough to start knowing that I could walk and hang out with people, that's what I did. Every day I get home from school, probably wouldn't see my parents till, because second shift, you might come home at 3 o'clock after school and not see your parents till after 11.
Right. Yep. No, there was some of that too. Mom worked 2 jobs. She was a single mom before my sophomore year of high school when we moved in with a guy. It had just been her for years.
Yeah.
And she always worked 2 jobs. And so she was gone in the evenings. And it was just kind of a free for all, man. And I would never ever blame her because she was doing what she knew to do to raise a family.
Yeah.
And there was 3 of us kids and just her. So I have mad respect for her. But it was tough. It really, it taught me some very necessary life skills. I knew how to cook long before I moved out of the house because that was the only way I was going to eat.
Oh, you can cook too.
It's the only way I was going to eat.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
I learned how
been
to
a
make a
journey.
mean bowl of macaroni and cheese.
You sound like my daughter. A 15-year-old kid, she can eat a whole box to herself.
Oh yeah, that's mandatory. That was mandatory. Come home from school, either eat a bag of popcorn or a box of macaroni and cheese. That was when the Kraft Velveeta cheese was starting to come out too.
Yeah. Yeah, she won't eat that cheap stuff. It's got to be the shells and cheddar.
That's right. That's funny. But yeah, I mean, I don't blame my parents at all. I've had some issues with that over the years. But now looking at it, and I felt like that most of my life, and my parents just did the best they could, and I feel like most parents really do that. I mean, yeah, I know there's some people out there that don't make good decisions and in bad situations, but overall, I feel like most parents do the best they can with the knowledge they have.
Right.
I think it's hard to judge, especially previous generations, where there's a couple of a generation or two in between you. Like with I guess it wouldn't be a generation between, but the baby boomer generation, which would be my parents, because they grew up in a completely different world than what we grew up in. Even in the 80s and 90s, I mean, you talk about growing up in the 50s and 60s with parents that grew up in the early 1900s, and you think about how far
the Depression.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think a lot of people grasp how tough the world was back then.
It hasn't been that long.
No,
That's
it
what
hasn't.
we don't realize.
Yeah, we're only a few decades probably. I mean, in Keith's lifetime probably since indoor plumbing.
I gotta get a snicker out of him, but no. But it's true. I mean, well, if you think about, we all know where we were as a country, 150, 180 years ago, with Jim Crow and slavery and Civil War and stuff like that. And that's not that many generations ago. And our parents were growing up the descendants of that stuff, so they grew up a different way. I know my mom talked about being a middle child, I think, in a very large family, having to raise other siblings and work full time as a single mom.
Yeah.
And it's like just crazy to think about what that's like in the 60s and in the 70s, where as a single mom, you're like scorned.
Yeah. It's times are definitely different. My grandfather couldn't read or write. He never made it past first grade because him and his 12 or 13 siblings were expected to work on the farm.
Yeah.
That's how they survived.
Mm-hmm.
And he, even though he couldn't read or write, he was very successful. He worked for 50 years and made a living and made it work. But someone today that can't read or write.
Oh man, you're in bad shape.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, look at how much difficult, like you talk about with the technology, how much difficulty we have with those skills. And we still have trouble adjusting to stuff. I know I'm not good with computers and that stuff either. I learned that stuff from the hard way, from having to do it, and people show me over and over again, and then I get mad because they've showed it to you a couple times, But I mean, to not be able to read and write in a world where everybody else is struggling just to use computers, I mean, that's you don't have much of a chance.
Nope, that's it's definitely just a different world altogether.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to continue to change. I mean, I don't know how much you get into weird stuff, but like with artificial intelligence and stuff coming, more and more people are going to be displaced from their jobs, or you're going to have so many skills to have a good job. And this is where people get into advocating for that universal basic income. As more and more people are displaced from the workforce, especially poor communities don't have the skill development. So what do you do with those people? They're going to still be alive even if they can't get jobs.
Right.
And that's kind of where we end up with a lot of the population that we work with, is that these people are here. They're not going anywhere. There's no resources for them, but they're still here.
Yeah.
And so something has to be done to account for that. And so it's the same way with workforce development, or you just end up with a lot of low skilled developed people, or, which we've run into in a lot of rural communities, and then that's just going to get worse as it gets more technological, Everybody can become peer specialists.
Yeah, wouldn't that be the dream?
What do you think about being a peer specialist?
What do you think about this work?
I enjoy it most days. Some days are stressful. it's not what I thought it would be, for sure.
Okay. Tell me a little bit more about that. What?
Well, I felt that getting into this, I would be working with a lot more people that wanted the change and were really ready to do it. And it seems that now that I know about the stages of change, because of the training I've been through for this job, I realized that
Over and over
most of these people that we start working with really, truly aren't ready for change yet.
Yeah.
They just want help of some sort, whether it be a ride, somebody to talk to, somebody to help them make phone calls, whatever. But when it comes down to it, they're really not ready to change yet.
Yeah.
So it makes my job, I'm not going to say difficult, but I feel like I'm responsible for pushing them to that point where they're ready to change.
Yeah.
And some days when that doesn't happen, we have to remind ourselves that it's not on us, that we did what we could, and just continue to encourage. But sometimes it just feels like beating a dead horse.
Yeah.
You get to the point where you're like, and then I have to remind myself, like, how long did I do it? How many times did I say that I was going to quit before I did?
True that.
And so it's a lot. There's a lot of self-reflection. I've learned a lot about myself since getting into this work that I was unaware of. And it's only been 3 months. So I can only imagine, another 6 months to a year down the road, like, I think that I'll be even more self-aware.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's funny how recovery works like that. I got into this job to help other people, and now I'm realizing it's helping me too.
It's how service work works.
Yeah, and it's beautiful.
That's that 12th
it really
step.
is. That 12th, and that's exactly what it is. And it's beautiful, and that goes back to the smart recovery.
Yeah.
I was approached about that, and I was like, "Is this something I want to do?" And then the more I get into it, the more I realize that I need it too.
Yeah.
So I think that the meetings will be therapeutic for me as well. And I tell people that now quite often when I'm asked, do you go to 12-step meetings still? And I say, no, I don't. Yeah. My therapy and my group, they're my coworkers and my participants.
Yeah, we live that stuff every day.
Absolutely. And for lack of better terms, I tell people sometimes I deal with other people's problems all day. I don't want to get off work and go deal with other people's problems too.
Sure.
And that might be kind of selfish. But in this line, we have to protect our own mental health and our own physical health and well-being as well. And that's another thing I've learned a lot about is that self-care. I knew that it was preached and preached and preached. And now 3 months into it, I'm really starting to feel that that's very necessary. I went to the gym last night for the first time in a long time because I'm like, I need to do this. Like that quiet time on the treadmill with my music in my ears.
That's all I do. That's all I do, dude. It's meditation, man.
Yeah.
It's meditation. I get on there, like you say, 45 minutes to an hour, man. I can listen to just some instrumental music. I've gotten to where I like listening to Native American flute and just walk.
Huh.
And just like I said, it's therapeutic.
It is. I just zone out. I don't care what's going on around me. And it's just funny because I know that works for me. I've done it before.
Yeah.
And I constantly find myself drifting away from it.
Sure.
Knowing that it's what I need to do.
Yeah.
But sometimes we get just too relaxed in our own recovery and we're like, oh, I got this. And then we start feeling kind of down and crappy. And upon thinking about it, you're like, well, of course I feel crappy. I'm not doing the stuff that I know I need to do to feel well. So it's not a shocker. But and some of that goes back to those thought pattern changes. If I can change those thought patterns towards more positive stuff in the gym, then I can continue to make that journey and make those trips to the gym. and just keep those intrusive thoughts out of, oh, well, I'm tired. It's easy to make excuses at the end of the day.
It is.
I've had a long day. I'm not going to do it. I'll put it off till tomorrow. And then tomorrow comes and something else happens, and it's just like, I used to use those situations to drink, and now I use them to get out of the gym.
Yeah.
It's the same thought pattern.
Kinda,
you gotta change it.
Absolutely. The same thing, same way to change it.
Yeah. And to be able to identify that, and it's nice, you know, that to get to a point where you can see in yourself what you need to work on and then be able to address it.
That's awesome, man. That is absolutely awesome. And that is like how I imagine living a self-directed life. Being self-aware of what's going on to where, these thought patterns, which is what it is more times than not, it's our thought patterns controlling us more than other people.
Yeah.
But when we can take control of those thought patterns and we can cast those thought patterns down, we become autonomous and have control of our whole life. Things don't control us anymore. Thoughts don't control us anymore. And like I say, to me, that's the empowerment of recovery, is getting to that place. And I feel like, especially through our work, and through the way the recovery community is now, because you have all these tools at your disposal. It's not like 20 years ago where it was just the 12 steps, which are a great thing. I hold the Blue Book in the highest regard, just behind the Bible, as far as the best books ever written, the big book. But it was so limiting. Now we have so many tools at our hands. Like you talk about that, going to the gym and working out or walking on the treadmill. This burns cortisol, the stress hormone in our body. What we oftentimes don't realize, and try to talk to people about, especially the early months of recovery, you're going through withdrawal, is that your body and your mind start to actually fight you. It's not just a decision you're making, so we have this stress hormone cortisol that we're produced through the day, and mainly because of our sedentary lifestyle, we don't burn enough off of it. And it causes us to be restless at night, causes those thought patterns to race in a negative pattern more often than not. Not that that's science-based. I just kind of add the negative part because it just seems to be where it tends to go. But we can control that somewhat by going and working out a little bit. Then you add in a little meditation and some journaling to increase self-awareness. Now you got a self-care routine, where now you're coping with life stresses rather than not just turning to alcohol or booze, but just not being miserable.
Right.
And you're healthier. Your immune system is stronger. So you're more resistant to viruses and more resistant to stress. So it's like it's snowball and just keeps building. Well, until the day you stop, and then you got to start all over again.
It's funny you talk about stress and illness like that, and things. There was a point in my life where I'd literally stressed, and because of the stress, drank myself into shingles.
Yeah.
At the age of 30.
Wow.
And the doctors were like, "This is not normal at your age."
Yeah.
And they started asking questions, and I did not disclose the amount of alcohol I drank.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that, I, through some research on my own, that it's highly likely that I had literally drank my body into such a weak state, and my mind was in such a weak state that it threw me into a shingles outbreak.
Yeah.
Like I said, at the age of 30, they were like, what? And it's just, it's weird how things like that happen in life and we just keep on using.
Yeah.
That wasn't enough to stop. Like, looking back, there were so many things that, where it should have been enough reason to stop, and I just kept going. There's that illness, those thoughts. That's what it goes back to is, well, I can't quit. I'll always, and I used to say that, like, well, I might moderate my drinking someday, but I'll never quit. I love it.
Yeah. And that's typically the criticism that people levy against referring to themselves as alcoholics and drug addicts, or, and why we try to reframe things as people in recovery is a lot of people have said that they feel like it just reinforces that mentality that I'm still dealing with those issues.
Same thing with mental health challenges. With people point towards once you label somebody with a diagnosis, that kind of diagnosis becomes a part of them. Well, then that becomes limiting because you're more than your diagnosis. You're more than your alcoholism.
Right, that's not your identity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's huge too, is to get those of us in recovery to realize that's not our identity.
Yeah.
That, we might have been someone that used drugs or alcohol, but that doesn't mean that we identify as an alcoholic for the rest of our life.
Absolutely.
People do change. People do recover. I don't identify as an alcoholic.
Right.
I'm healed. I've been delivered from that.
Right.
So I identify as someone that is in recovery that did suffer from alcoholism, but that's not who I am today.
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes when I identify, I like to talk about the different things I'm in recovery from because there's so much. It wasn't just my alcoholism and my crack addiction, my propensity to steal other people's stuff. It was there's a lot of childhood trauma in there, and then there's trauma from being in the justice system and just trauma from being in those situations all the time. And then just trauma from dealing with life.
Life is traumatic.
No kidding, man. It's tough.
Yeah.
Life is tough.
I think it's only going to get tougher.
Oh my gosh, I know. It's crazy like that.
Yeah. What do you do?
Well, and that's why it's so important to be able to face your struggles. That's why it's so important to develop things like resilience. So that you can cope with those struggles, because struggle is going to come.
Absolutely.
We know that. It's never going to stop as long as we're in this world. We'll always have troubles. And when we just try to mask them or try to hide, try to bury them, or drink them away or just ignore them, gambling, anything, eventually that stuff's going to catch up with us because it's not a solution. No, it's a temporary Band-Aid. Yeah. So, your troubles always end up there, typically worse, with a couple charges on top of them. What can you do? Identity is so important. You mentioned identity. I feel like I talk a lot of times about a relapse that I had for about 4 years. And I feel like most of it was was an identity issue, especially from a faith-based pathway of recovery. I stopped taking my identity from the cross and started taking it from my role as a youth pastor. And that got me into some trouble where the man is, not just a person in recovery, not just as a man, just as a person, man, the ego is a very deceptive foe.
Oh, yes. Pride, man.
Yeah.
Pride and anger were two of my big things that I had to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So, sometimes we quit, focusing things where they need to be and start focusing on ourselves, thinking we got things, we're doing this, we're doing that, taking our identity from our work, which is the worst thing you can take your identity from, but we do it, and it just sets yourself up for failure. So getting your identity from a good, healthy place is important. Well, Daniel, I tell you what, man, it has been an absolutely great conversation.
Yeah, it's been an honor, Mike.
I have really, really appreciated watching you over the past few years in recovery. It's been amazing having you be a part of our organization. Like I said, you served on our board of directors for probably about a year before you started working with us. Yeah. Doing some great things. I know you cook a lot of meals for everybody. Just watching you serve the community, not just in our organization, but in a bunch of organizations, in a bunch of places. It's been very humbling to see somebody with such a servant's heart. So I appreciate you. I appreciate you being on our podcast, and look forward to working with you more in the future.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Yep.